General Mithril. I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little less hairy.
Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril, and today I have the next installment in my Star Wars Shatterpoint series, the first villain to hit the channel, the fearsome, cunning and malicious Separatist droid general, General Grievous. A challenging model for sure, lots of intricate edge highlighting and platework, combined with subtle blending of cloths and colours over the cloak, with added freehand, all set off beautifully by the vibrant blue and green spot colours of his stolen sabers. This model truly has it all. Once you have your model prepped and built, undercoat it thoroughly with Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey. Brushes ready guys, and let's get painting. Base colours. To start with, I base coated all the robotic limbs underneath the armour plating with a 50-50 mix of Eclipse Grey and Black, opting for more matte finish for this version of Grievous, but you can do this with metallics as well should you wish. Areas to focus on include the legs, feet, all four arms, the areas to the side of his torso, the neck, and any recessed linings around the chest and face areas. All the armour plating was then given a base coat with a 3:2 ratio mix of Thra Brown and Graphite. This was applied over multiple thin down coats to get a nice, smooth, pristine finish to the plating. The smoother you can make this, the better the overall look will be when we reach the final highlight stages later on. The reverse of the cloak was then given a base coat with a 2:1 ratio mix of Rainy Grey and Petroleum Grey, again applied in a few thin coats to get smooth coverage over the material as it's quite a large flat area of the model. The underside of the cloak was then given a base coat with a 50-50 mix of Sharpnel Red and Tinderlosh Red, making sure to get this base coat in all the grooves between the intricate diamond patterning, being as thorough as possible for a consistent finish. The hilts of all four sabers were then carefully picked out using black metal, being careful to avoid clipping the fingers. Two of the blades were then given a base coat using sky blue. I opted to do one blade each side at diagonal to one another to keep the model as balanced as possible when we're done. The remaining two blades were then given a base coat using Irati. Robotic Limbs. A manual shape was applied to the robotic limbs using pure black. This can be a challenging stage to work with. I tried my best here to focus this on the inner area of each limb, leaving the original base coat showing towards the edges as much as I could. The two most daunting and time-consuming parts of Grievous are without a doubt the inner robotics and the armour plating. Nailing these is crucial to your finished droid general. I slowly started layering up the inner robotics now with a 3:1 mix of the base coat mix and Hyrule Blue. The Hyrule Blue will bring up the tone gradually and more naturally than a lighter grey or white would at this stage. You want to focus this now around the framework of every limb, both legs and all the grey details, leaving the shade showing in the recesses. Continue layering up the robotics now by adding Ledanis Grey into the overall mix at an approximate 3:1 ratio, favouring the previous mix. Keep your additions of Ledanis Grey gradual here. Too much too quickly will overblow the tone and look unnatural. Keep adding Ledanis in as many increments as you feel necessary, with each pass concentrating more on the vertices and edges of all the limbs, building up the sharpness towards all the edges. When you're happy with the look of your layered up limbs, start adding white into the mix and apply this as an extreme edge highlight over the upper and more prominent areas of exoskeleton. This will give the impression of light bouncing off the uppermost areas and reinforce the transition from the shadowy areas through to the lighter parts now. By the time you reach the final highlight stage, you're looking at applying this to the dot highlight just on the corners and absolute sharpest points of the exoskeleton. Armour plating. All the beige armour plating was given a thorough all-over wash with some heavily diluted petroleum grey. As a lot of these areas are flat, take extra care here to avoid any of this pooling as much as possible. Once this is dry, all the plate work was relayered over with a 4:1 slightly altered mix of Thrar brown and graphite. Again, keeping the application here gradual and over multiple layers to maintain a smooth, crisp finish to the good general. Being careful again to leave the grey showing in the recesses, particularly around the chest plate and faceplate. Start layering up all the platework now with a 50-50 mix of Thrar brown and Mojave white, following the same sort of process as we did for the robotic limbs, working this towards the edges of all these areas in preparation for the following highlight stages. Continue adding Mojave white into the mix gradually for as many layers as you wish until you build up to an initial highlight using pure Mojave white. Again, as I did for the previous stage, now I'm focusing on creating some sharpness and malice over the armour with tight, controlled edge highlights around all the armour edges, once again reinforcing the transition from shadow to the lighter, more prominent areas. For the final highlight stage, I applied a few extreme edge highlights with a mix of white sands and purity white, leading up to a dot highlight with an approximate 50-50 split mix, again just to accentuate the sharpest corners and edges of the armour, and finishing off the two most time consuming areas of this model, finally. Cloak. A manual shade was applied to the recessed folds of the cloak reverse using Tinderloss Red. This is followed by an all-over shade with a 50-50 mix of diluted Tinderloss Red and Arbuckle's Brown, allowing this to run into all the grooves between the diamond texture. With the shades now in place and dry, I applied a layer next by adding Mars Orange into the base coat mix. Here I wanted to quickly pick up the diamond patterning, accentuating the more prominent folds of the cloak reverse. As I'm going to be dry brushing the majority of the reds, I don't need to worry about picking out every single diamond at this stage, thankfully. I increased the amount of Mars Orange in the mix for the first, fairly heavy dry brush stage. This will pick out any remaining diamonds in the pattern and will further reinforce the lighter areas over the more prominent folds. Working our way up to a penultimate dry brush layer using pure Mars Orange, applying this lighter with each pass, focusing as you can see here on the larger material folds. final highlight dry brush was applied with a 2-to-1 mix of Mars Orange and Keny Yellow. A recessed shape was applied to the outer cloak necks with a 2-to-1 mix of petroleum grey and rainy grey. Be careful with the amount of petroleum grey as is mixed, as too much will look too dark when it dries in the recesses. I then started layering up the cloak with a layer of pure rainy grey, leaving the recessed shade showing in the recesses. Due to the pigment of the rainy grey, you'll achieve a better effect by making multiple passes at this stage rather than trying to achieve it in one go. The highlights were built up by adding Miskatonic Grey into the rainy grey used for the previous layer stage, starting at a 3-to-1 approximate ratio and building up gradually with more Miskatonic Grey until you reach the final edge highlight, which should finish at anywhere between 75 and 80% concentration of Miskatonic Grey. Again, building up these highlights very gradually, focusing on blending in the lighter and darker greys as you move through to the upper folds and edges of all the cloth. Now the next stage is purely optional, but displayed here should you wish to give it a go. The freehand design on the back of Grievous was carefully mapped out using pure petroleum grey. Working this over the folds in the cloak can prove quite challenging, so I recommend you have a reference picture to hand to make sure each side of the design stays as symmetrical as possible. When you're happy with the look of your freehand design, very carefully highlight around the edges of the design using pure Miskatonic Grey, keeping your brush strokes as precise and controlled as possible for the cleanest finish. Finishing details and base. A quick targeted shape was applied to all 4 saber hilts using Nuln oil. When this was dry, a quick highlight was applied over each one using Thrash Metal. The blue blades were layered up by adding white into the sky blue, focusing on the upper half of the blades and adding more white into the mix as you progress through to the fine edge highlight at the very top of the blade. At this final stage, your mix should be approximately 1 part sky blue to about 3 parts white. The same treatment was then given to the green blades, using the same concentrations of white this time, added to the Arati base coat instead. The eye holes in the faceplate were carefully picked out using pink flesh. A dot of black was then applied in the centre to mark out the eyes. And finally the pupils finished off with a dot of tinner yellow either side. The statue underneath Grievous was given a thorough base coat of brown grey, making sure to get in the grooves and crevices of all the stone texture and around the facial details. An all-over shade was applied to the Jedi statue next with heavily diluted black, giving a really good hue and stone texture for the following dry brushes to build off next. An initial heavy dry brush was applied to the statue with a 50-50 mix of brown grey and Miskatonic grey, passing over the texture of the stonework, allowing some of the shade to show underneath to help give an authentic, rocky appearance. Adding more Miskatonic grey into the mix, building up the dry brush layers and highlights. You can add as much or as little Miskatonic as you wish here, depending on how light you want the stone to be when we're finished. I then opted to slather the statue in weathering pigment to give it an aged, forgotten look. There you have it, the Separatist droid general, Jedi hunter extraordinaire finished, sabers spinning and ready to strike terror into the heart of his foes on the tabletop, whether they be clone, Jedi, or unfortunate battle droid happens to be in his way. The base was finished off using our Shatterpoint basing tutorial, which can be found at the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. Please like, subscribe and hit the bell for upload notifications, and until next time guys, may the force be with you and happy hobbying!